Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Not really. Is that better? Okay, I'll speak up. How's that? I'm very glad I don't believe in omens, and I hope you don't either. So far, the elevator wasn't working, the door was stuck, and the images won't go on the screen. Other than that, we're in good shape. So, yeah. The sun is out. Thank you very much. Always glad to have an optimist around. And in a few minutes, right, just a few minutes, technical help will walk through the door, and that will make it possible for me to show you some pictures related to Robert Frost. But I'd like to wait until the end of the talk to do that, just to give the technical aspect time to not break down. We'll see. Okay. So, Robert Frost. I meet a lot of people who know one fact about Robert Frost, and that fact is he was born in San Francisco. That's right. I mean, people find it unusual that the person who sort of made New England famous in a way, or made poetry about New England a household word, that he should be born in San Francisco. And I find that the people who know that fact don't want to know much more. I mean, they're quite proud of themselves for knowing that, and beyond that, well, now I'm assuming that all of you would like to know more than that, and that's why you're here at a talk called Young Robert Frost. So to start off with San Francisco makes sense. San Francisco, the year before Robert Frost was born, Mark Twain had written a book about the world that they were in, and he called it the Gilded Age. Gilded, not golden. Golden ages are always the one we missed, right? So the Gilded Age, and a lot of people were feeling disappointed in those years. If you're talking about San Francisco, there were plenty of disappointed people who had gone there in 1849 and after that, who had gone hoping for gold, who didn't find it. But the San Francisco Robert Frost grew up in was still remembering that. I've looked at the city directories from a lot of years around that time, and in San Francisco you could still buy a lot of mining equipment. You could buy dynamite, pumps to get water out of mines, lots of things. So there were still some people hanging on, still hoping to be able to strike it rich, but everybody didn't. There were still boatloads, literally many boatloads of people every day arriving in San Francisco. So there were funny currents going on. There was a lot of building taking place because they needed it, because they needed housing. All these people showing up, and they still didn't have enough houses. It was really shocking to read what it was like. Just after the gold rush, a few years after it, they were very proud. Well, this year, no more paper and cloth houses. We got rid of the last of those. You know, we think paper and cloth. And then the year Robert Frost was born, they were saying, well, the last of the tar paper shacks are gone. So you're seeing that it was pretty desperate because they had been flooded with all these people in a place where there had been not much a little while before that. Okay, that's San Francisco, but really the story of Robert Frost does start in New England because that's where his parents came from. Well, at least his father. Okay, so one at a time. We're talking about Lawrence, Massachusetts. Lawrence, Massachusetts. Now, doing the work that I've done, for talks like this and for other things about Robert Frost, I've gone there, and they have a wonderful, wonderful history center. And they've preserved lots of records from the times I'm going to tell you about. But it's also true, if you look up Lawrence, Massachusetts, if you Google it today, it will tell you that if you go there, your chances of being the victim of a violent crime or a property crime are 1 in 41. Now, that is not a big number, right? 1 out of 41 is not a big number. We went there anyway, my husband and I did. We were a little bit nervous about leaving the car, but we were fine. And this history center is absolutely fabulous because it's in a building that was part of the history of that town. The history of that town is all about mills. A New England town on a river, of course they had mills, but this was super, super mills. At one time, the mills in that town put together produced more cloth, more woolen, worsted wool in particular, than any factory anywhere, not just in the United States of America, but anywhere. There were some very smart managers. And I know how smart they were because I've seen the records they kept. They wrote down everything, you know, who worked there. Hello? Are you here to bring tech help? God bless you. Thank you. Is it okay if I keep talking, John? Okay. So, big textile mills. Now, what has this got to do with Robert Frost? His grandfather, whose name was William Prescott Frost Sr., was an overseer in one of the mills. And since the mills, we're talking about them collectively, since the mills in that town employed more than 1/3 of the population of that town, if you had status in the mills, you had status. So everybody knew who Mr. Frost was. He lived in a nice house. He was married to a very nice woman. They were respectable. If you wanted to describe their tastes, you would say they were conservative in what that meant then, which is not the same as what it means today, I think. It didn't necessarily have political overtones. They belonged to the Congregational Church. They were good, upstanding citizens. Mr. Frost had never gone to college, but that wasn't unusual in those days. You could graduate from college and get a perfectly good job. They had a son. His name was William Prescott Frost Jr., and he was good looking. He was athletically built. He was not terrifically athletic, but he could have been more. He was very bright. And that meant that for him, school was easy. In fact, everything was easy for him. And he was also the polite word is high-spirited, right? Smart and high-spirited. We would have other words for that. We could say, for example, that he was a teenage runaway, which he was. He was growing up during the years of the Civil War. And he was really very interested in the war on the side of the South, yay! Now, in Lawrence, Massachusetts, you can imagine how popular that made you. That embarrassed his parents. He did a lot of things that embarrassed his parents, but he was very bright. His father had big plans for him. His father thought, okay, he'll go to college, go to law school, come back to Lawrence and work in a mill as a lawyer, so he'll be part of the management class in this town and be involved with the mills. It'd be terrific. That was the father's plan. The son cooperated somewhat. Well, he went to Harvard. You know, they were in Massachusetts. If you go to Harvard, if you go to college, that's where you're going to go. I mean, it was so effortless for him. We got to remember it was a long, long time before even 1% of the people of college age were in college in this country. Far, far, far below 1%. And young Mr. Frost was part of that 1%. He did not knock himself out studying. He did graduate number 5 in his class out of 112 people that had started with 130 people. He was in Phi Beta Kappa. He won a few other prizes. He won a writing prize. So this was somebody with talent. And he also had imagination. I can tell you that because he had his own plans for what he wanted to do when he graduated. He was going to California. He was not going to go back to Lawrence. What a choice, Lawrence, Mass. Okay. So, but he even had a plan on how to do it. He would get jobs along the way to pay for his passage. Now remember, this is only 5 years after the railroad connected the continent, right? So these are kind of bold moves on his part. He went, in the first stage, he went as far as Pennsylvania, a small town called Lewistown, Pennsylvania. And there was a school there. He never wanted a career in teaching, but if you have a fresh Harvard degree and you're charming and a good talker and quick on your feet, and he was all those things, you could sort of walk into a teaching job. He did, actually walked into the job as principal of this school. He kept the job for a year. You can say, well, that's not very important. Well, it wouldn't have been important except where he was at this school, there was one other person teaching, and he married her, right? Actually, he fell in love big time for this woman. He wrote her a letter and said, I am convinced that to a great extent, the destiny of my life is in your hands. A month after that letter, they were married. Okay. She was 6 years older than he was. She was an immigrant from Scotland. And when she talked, you could tell, right? She had a heavy, heavy accent, which she never lost, ever. She was very, people talked about her bearing. You would notice how straight she looked always, how she carried herself. She was graceful. She was also very bright. And she believed in young Mr. Frost. She believed in him enough to go along with this plan that he had to, let's go to California. I don't know anybody there. You don't know anybody there, but I'm sure we'll get jobs. And we'll do fine. And she said, fine. But he wanted to go first. And he told her that he'd go, he'd get a job, and then he'd send for her. And they did that. He was there just a few months before she was. Then she got on the train. He gave her detailed instructions. It's hilarious because she was older and more experienced as a traveler than he was, but he still told her, you know, how much to tip, how many meals to bring, where to change trains. I mean, it was very cute. He didn't know, and I don't think she did either. She was pregnant, right? They were married, but she was already expecting Robert Frost when she got on that train and got herself to San Francisco. San Francisco was, in those days, very much a man's town. There were more men than women by a ratio of something like 8 to 5. In the city, there were 200,000 people. I say that knowing that it's only an estimate because nobody really counted Chinese people. They made guesses, but you know, it was very much sort of, you don't go there. You hire these people, but you know, it was fantastically segregated in a very polite, unacknowledged way. Fascinating things you find out. It was a town with lots and lots and lots and lots of bars and saloons and places where you could buy drink. A lot of men carried guns. It was a rough place. And I think about her in that town where she doesn't know anybody, and I know that the first winter that she was there, that it rained much more than usual. So here she is, cooped up, pregnant in this place where she doesn't know anybody. She's a tough woman. She's a very tough woman. Meanwhile, her husband did just fine. He wrote to her when she was waiting for the word to come. And in no time at all, I got a job. I just wrote a story for the Bulletin. And then the next letter, great, I just sold a story to the Chronicle. He had written a story about packed juries, which was a hot topic that year in San Francisco. So come on, we'll be fine. He did keep getting work. By the end of the first year out there, he was the city editor of the San Francisco Daily Post. So he was doing terrifically well. She was not so happy. By the time she was pregnant for Robert Frost was born. We've got to acknowledge that. This was in 1874, March 26th. 1874. Now think about this. This one amazes me. I remember, and probably at least some of the people here remember, seeing Robert Frost on television when JFK was inaugurated. Do you remember? Some people remember. Okay. That's okay if I'm the oldest person in the room. But the man we saw on television with President Kennedy was born when the president was Ulysses S. Grant. Isn't that amazing? That's incredible. I mean, that's two different worlds. That's two different Americas, two different places. He saw so much change. But once upon a time, he was a baby. And when he was a baby, his father decided that his name should be Robert Lee Frost. Oh, yeah, for you know who. Big fan, right? Robert Lee Frost. Eventually that became sort of embarrassing for Robert Lee Frost. When he was in high school, Okay, so here's little baby Robert Frost with his mother and his father. His father found a lot to do in San Francisco. All those bars, all those places. He learned about gambling. He was good at making connections. He was invited into the Bohemian Club, where the movers and shakers all socialized. He was in with that. She was lonesome. Her name was Isabel Moody, Mrs. Frost, Isabel Moody Frost. Everybody called her Belle. She was not getting out much, making a lot of friends. So when little Robbie is 2, she decided, okay, there's going to be another baby. She knew she was pregnant. She knew she didn't want to have baby number 2 in San Francisco because she knew that with 2 babies, her hands would be full, and she knew she could not count on Mr. Frost to be a lot of help. So in November, this was with little Robbie, 2 years old, she got on the train and decided to go east where she knew some people. She left in November. She came back in June. She was gone a while. She came back in June with the second baby, little girl named Jeannie, who was never strong, never well, and it's a sad story. Robert Frost and his 2 years younger sister were never really close. Okay, but Robbie was the stronger baby and the stronger boy. Robbie loved being in San Francisco. There was a lot to see, a lot to do. If you read some books about Robert Frost, they'll tell you that, he was always a stinker, and that when he was little, he would lie to his mother and say that he was sick, and she would say, oh, that's okay, you can stay home from school. And he didn't get to go to school very much because he was such a bad kid, and he just kept lying to his mother. Well, I decided to do a little digging and find out what was going on. Now, his mother had been a teacher. She had been to college. She had a lot more teaching experience than the job where she met her husband. She had already been teaching. And she looked at what schools were like in California, and she decided no, that she knew she could do a better job than these schools could do educating her son. So she kept him home a lot. And she would read to him, and he loved it. And even after he learned how to read, she would read to him and his sister all the time. It was a big influence. I know it was a big influence because Frost and his wife, eventually, when they had kids, did the same thing. They read to their kids a lot, even when the kids knew how to read. When the kids are 11 and 12 years old, they would still read to them every single day. So here's Robbie being what we would call homeschooled. And his mother also, being a sturdy Scottish woman, would take him outdoors. Fresh air is a great remedy. And of course, some of the most beautiful fresh air anywhere, I think, is in San Francisco Bay area. So she would take him out and they would go for walks. And she would teach him how to notice nature. So that if you just looked at, that's a hillside, that's some trees, she would say, but yes, notice the hill. Notice how the slopes go down to the sea. Look at the kinds of trees. Smell what it's like. Look around. What about those birds? What are they? And what are these plants? So he learned how to notice from this bright mother of his. Meanwhile, Mr. Frost, who was still not taking care of his health especially, decided that he would dabble in politics. So, and he was, again, very likable, very charming, fun to be around. So when the Democratic Party of San Francisco, and he was always a Democrat, got together its delegation to send them to Cincinnati in 1880, he was part of that. And little Robbie Frost remembers a parade and send-off, and he remembered being in a fire truck. And I know from people in his family, I know from Robert Frost's granddaughter, whom I've talked to quite a lot, she said that when he was old, he was always old, that he still talked about that. The parade and the truck and the lights and the yay, thank you. Thank you very much. That she talked about, Frost, talked about that for the rest of his life. He very much liked being in San Francisco. Okay, can we just get back to the first one that just, the very top of the thumbnails, please, that just has the title? Thank you, thank you. So, he was having fun. As I say, when he was growing up, his father wasn't around a lot. Because his father was not around a lot, little Rob could do things on his own. He was in a gang. It's pretty innocent compared to what we think of. The most outrageous thing that they ever did in his gang was to steal a pig. That was big doings. Okay. Also, when he was little, maybe 11.
John will flip the slides whenever you want.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. You saved the day. Thank you. Okay, so little Robert Frost, when he was 11 years old, had a job selling newspapers. He was selling the paper his father was writing for. Now picture that, Robert Frost as a newsie. Remember all those pictures, little boys in the little caps? So he was very happy there. This wonderful life, as far as he was concerned, came to an end very abruptly and very brutally. Because also, when he was 11, his father died. His father was not an old man. His father was 35 years old. Yeah, wow. So here's Belle with 2 children. She doesn't know a soul. Her husband left her $9 plus some debts. That was sort of a secret. What I mean by that is his parents back in Lawrence, Massachusetts, had been sending him money to pay on a life insurance policy. Their nightmare was, what if our son, our only child, when he's out there in California, what if he dies? We want him to be able to be brought home. So they took out an insurance policy just for that, and they sent him money to make payments on it, but that money never got to the insurance company. That money got gambled. That money got gone. So here's the woman with 2 children, no relatives of her own within thousands of miles. So she took the ferry over to Oakland. In Oakland, you get on the train, and she headed back to Lawrence, Massachusetts. She thought these people might be able to suggest what she could do. They were on the train for about a week. I love to think of young Frost, this bright 11-year-old boy, riding across places where, well, we know there were still Indians, right, in the West. This was still wild in many of the places he went through. So they got to Lawrence, Massachusetts, and right away, little Robbie and his sister did not like it. Robert Frost, and he said this, he admitted it. He said, "I did not like the Yankees. I thought they were cold." Of course, everything he saw, he and his sister, everything they were comparing to California, which was the only place they could remember having lived. Merrimack River, big deal. You know, they remembered the Pacific Ocean. You think of the Merrimack, come on. You know. So they said mean things about the place. They were not ready to like it very much. But some people were trying to be nice, because here's this woman and these kids and no husband. But the people trying to be nice did not include the grandparents, especially. They almost blamed Belle for their son's early death. He was their only child. They thought that if he had had a different kind of wife, that he would have taken care of himself, things would have been much better. Okay, they had gone to visit once in California, and they disapproved of everything they saw. They had visited their son once in California, and they noticed that Belle was not a good housekeeper, and that she didn't do a lot of nourishing cooking, and that she didn't even send their son to school. I mean, their grandson, right? Little Rob, she didn't even send him to school. So they found a lot to disapprove of, and here she was showing up with the 2 kids, and that was the first they knew that the insurance had not been paid for, that the money had never made it to the insurance. So there was a lot of friction and some sadness, you could say. But the Frosts had been in New England a long time. 1633, I call that a long time. That's when the first Frosts arrived in America. So there were other Frost relatives who could help. So there was a sister of the grandfather who had a nice country place in Amherst, New Hampshire. And so she said, well, why don't those kids come and stay with me for the summer? And they did, and they loved it, and it was wonderful. And then it was fall, and it was time to go to school. And Belle, of course, had to go and look over the school. And she looked over the school, and she said, we're going back to Lawrence, right? This was a school in the country. You have to remember, in the country, parents did not have the concept that you're supposed to send your kids to school every day. right? My husband and I have done some work on records of schools in Williston, Vermont, for example, and we know that these farm families would, maybe send the kids 2 days this week, or, if it doesn't rain, they can go. It's very casual, and Belle is thinking, no, 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 if they're going to go to school, we have to do it properly. So she went back to Lawrence with the kids. She didn't know where she was going to live, but she always thought, well, we'll figure it out. She got back to Lawrence. They were living in 2 furnished rooms. Not wonderful. Because the children had not been from a nearby school, they had to take a placement test to be allowed in the Lawrence schools. So here's Robbie and his sister. Now remember, his sister is 2 years younger. He was 11 years old. On the basis of the test, this is very bright little Robert Frost, 11 years old, they say, you belong in 3rd grade. His sister was 2 years younger. They said to her, you belong in 5th grade. He was furious. 11-year-old Robert Frost, he thought that was unfair and dumb. And I think that was the beginning of his relationship with formal education, that he sort of had this love-hate view of educational institutions. I think it lasted the rest of his life. But anyway, we're talking about young Frost. So he said, that test was not fair. He said, they were asking me questions about the Merrimack River. Why didn't they ask me about the Pacific Ocean? He thought that the cards had been stacked against him. He did go to school anyway. Then Belle realized that she really and truly did need to get a job. She knew that the Frost grandparents wouldn't help her, but she also knew that their next door neighbors were the Colcords, C-O-L-C-O-R-D, the Colcord family. And this was the Mr. Colcord's first name was Elihu, E-L-I-H-U, funny name. They lived right next door to the Frosts. The houses were sort of similar. This was on Haverhill Street in Lawrence, the houses right across from the big park that belongs to everybody called the Common. These 2 families next door, well, they had some things in common, these 2 families, and some things not. Mr. Frost's wife had been, this is Robert Frost's grandfather, Mr. Frost's wife had been Miss Colcord before she married him, okay? And Mr. Colcord had a sister who married a brother of Mr. Frost. Can you see? This is a brother and sister marrying a brother and sister, and they're next door to each other, okay? Now, you might think that, oh, well, they'll get along great because they've got so much in common. Well, actually, they didn't have that much in common. The Colcords were kind of, whatever the word now is for hip. I know it's not with it, because I've been told that people who are with it don't say with it anymore. But whatever that word is, they were that. Okay, they were flashy, and they liked to have people notice who they were. And they could get away with it. Mr. Frost was not that way. He had been a supervisor at the mill. He was somber. Okay. He was also probably sad by this time. I mean, let's remember this is a man whose one son has just died. So the Colcords, though, decided they knew that they had some influence in the town and they wanted to help Belle get a job. They did. Why did they have influence? The Colcords made belts. You're thinking, so? Okay, but these were not belts that hold up your pants. These were belts that made the giant looms, bigger than this room, in the factories work. These were industrial belts This is the infrastructure of Lawrence industry. So if the coal curds had status in that, they were very big deals, and they were. So when Uncle Elihu started asking around saying, well, we've got this young widow lady and she needs a job, do you suppose we could, and right away she had a job. The job was in Salem Depot, New Hampshire, but really it's right next door. It's very close by. You can just keep going down Essex Street and eventually you're over the line. So she got a teaching job. That looked very promising. But her ideas about education had a lot to do with how she treated her own children, and she thought they were doing very well. And she tried to apply those ideas in the school. Her ideas were to be gentle and to be encouraging and to compliment the kids on how well they were doing, to sort of keep them happy, have them enjoy learning. And the parents in Salem said, no. Spare the rod, spoil the child. They didn't think she was, I'll say, brutal enough. They didn't think that she was demanding enough, strict enough on the kids. They were sure that they knew better than this widow lady with an accent to, what is she? She's from California, isn't she? I mean, what are they, She got fired. That was not the only time that happened. She got other teaching jobs in other places. She didn't last a long time because she wasn't the way they thought teachers should be. Well, I was curious about that too, so I started digging. And I think that it was really all about getting students ready to be good workers in the mill eventually. It was all about regimentation. It was all about, the classes have got to run on time, and every chair has to be behind every other chair, and you get here on time, and you do your work, and you do not talk. Not talking was big. There were stories in the paper about teachers who went overboard that way, getting in trouble, because this, I'm not making this up, they would take sticks and put sticks in the mouths of little kids to make them stop talking. They would use rags. I don't know exactly what they did with the rags. They would use hot pepper. They would use mustard powder. They would do all these things that they thought they weren't trying to be cruel. They thought this was in the interest of the kids, to teach them how to take orders, respect authority, be good, regimented, obedient workers. And Belle was, we would say, coming from somewhere else. In every sense, she really was. She did not believe in any of that. So here's Robert Frost going to school, and what do you know, when she got that job in Salem Depot, New Hampshire, her children were her students, among others, right? It was a school that had a downstairs and an upstairs, 30 kids downstairs in the lower grades, upstairs grades 5 through 8 for Mrs. Frost. And I'm telling you that much detail because I'm going to show you a picture of it in a minute. Okay, so here she was teaching. So far, so good. Rob caught on. Eventually, it was time to go to high school. He was ready. He had just started to be ready to get serious about school. When Robert Frost was 14 years old, he did something he had never done before in his life. You're not going to believe it. He read a book. Yeah. I don't know how to spell that. I've always wondered. For the first time in his life, he read a whole book. The book was called The Scottish Chiefs. Yeah, of course. And I was curious about that, so I went and got a copy of that book. It's 500 pages, and it has some hard words in it. I mean, well, it has words like acquiesce and deprecatory. It has what my students call SAT words. You know, it had big words, but he stayed with it. He loved that book. It's about heroes. You know, he always loved heroes. And it's about heroes who would build up their strength by retreating to the country. You sort of go to the country and lie low and discipline yourself, of course. You know, you live a very regimented life, even though you're the one enforcing the regimentation. And by doing that, then you're strong enough for the trial that you may have to face. He loved that kind of story. When he was a little bit younger than that, he memorized a poem. It was over 112 lines long, not a good poem, about a hero in the Greek war, in a Greek war against the Turks in 1821. The poem is called Marco Bozzaris. It's a horrible poem, actually. And the poet who wrote it, I thought was, you know, forgotten forever. Fitzwilliam Halleck is his name. And then one day I noticed there's a statue of him in Central Park. You know, so there must have been somebody who thought that was a good poem. But that was not an unusual thing, to have a long memorized piece that you could recite. Belle was bringing up her children for polite society. And in polite society in those days, well-brought-up boys and girls had something that they could recite or a song they could sing. And the idea was that you would be able to contribute to the entertainment. Right, that everybody was supposed to do that. So Rob was supposed to do that, so he had his long poem about a hero, kind of thing he loved. Okay, had to take a test to get into Lawrence High School. He did, he passed, he started. On the first day of school, he showed up wearing a suit that had belonged to his grandfather, but his grandmother cut it down to fit him. Rob did not exactly fit in at Lawrence High School. He was still living in Salem Depot at that time, so he and his sister would get off the train at the foot of the main drag and then get on the streetcar and go all the way up to where the high school was. And he did his work. He really had no idea how he was doing in school, because in those days you got your grades, they called them your marks, you got them once at the end of the year. So at the end of his first year of high school, he found out he was #1 in the class. Uncle Elihu bought him a new suit, his own, for doing that. So he was a very good student. Other students who were in classes with him remembered him years later. They remembered he was always prepared. Some of them remembered that when they were sophomores, they were reading in Latin class. He took Latin every year. He took Greek for 3 years. In Latin class, they were reading Julius Caesar, not the play by Shakespeare. They were reading the Gallic Wars. They were reading what Shakespeare wrote. And there was a description of a bridge in it. It was very, very detailed. And one day, Rob showed up at school with a model of this bridge that he had built based on the description in Latin of what it looked. Nobody asked him to do that. This was spontaneous, you know, to show up. Oh yes, by the way, here's this Roman bridge that I built. Okay, they would remember him for that. Somebody was noticing that he was bright. He was in the debating society. He finished first in his class sophomore year. He finished first junior year. Senior year, he had to share the valedictory honors with another student. This was a girl. She had to be pretty good because she had finished high school in 3 years, and she was #1 in the class. He met her in the fall of his senior year, and that fall he fell in love, big time. 3 years after graduation, they got married. So I guess they really liked each other. She believed in him. Her name was Eleanor Miriam White. And some people go crazy looking at how often the word white appears in Robert Frost poems, more than any other color. Yeah. Sometimes it's what you mean. And if you talk about snow, I mean, you know. Okay. So here they were, very much in love, top of the class, and people start asking him, "What are you planning to do, Rob?" And he thought, well, I took entrance tests for college. He did. When he was a junior, he took the entrance for Harvard. He did fine. He could have gone to Harvard. His grandfather was going to pay for it, but his grandfather said, "Yes, I will pay for your college education. No, I will not pay for you to go to Harvard. That school already ruined one man in this family." Yeah, yeah. But there was a teacher in the high school who noticed that Frost was very good at science, which was something to notice because he never took a science course. He didn't have to. Right? And this man, I have not been able to find out his name, but he spotted this scientific spirit in Robert Frost, and he said, "I can get you into the college I just graduated from." That was Dartmouth. And he did, and he got Frost a good scholarship. Frost started and wasn't what he was expecting at all. At all. Started in September. By December, he left. He didn't resign, he didn't withdraw, he left. He didn't tell anybody anything official, he just didn't come back. Now, there are different versions of why he did this. Some people point out that, yes, this is the same year when his mother, who had recently been fired from a job again and had another teaching job, she was having a very hard time because if you have 8th graders, you have 14-year-olds, and some 14-year-olds are pretty big. And she had some big, I would say thuggish 14-year-olds, and they were giving her a hard time. And she wrote a letter to her son about this. He decided to vote with his feet. That was definitely an element in his leaving Dartmouth. And he told that years later to a friend of his. And I know that because I've seen the letter. So there are different ways of looking at his decision to leave. I also went to Dartmouth and looked at the names of all the people who started Dartmouth the year Robert Frost did. And I looked at the names of all the people who graduated 4 years later. And almost half of that class did not graduate. Right? In some cases, people had gone and been replaced by somebody else. But I think it's not a coincidence that there was also a financial panic in the United States of America in 1893, which was the year after, right? He left in December 92, and in 1893, the economy was very shaky. So I think it's a much more complicated story than just saying, oh, he didn't like college. He didn't, but there's a lot to it. He did marry the girl he loved, and people were asking him, you know, what exactly do you have in mind as a job in life, Rob? Because everybody remembered how smart he had been in high school and how he had started college. What are you going to do with yourself? And he said, I'm going to be a poet. They laughed too. I'm going to be a poet, and I'm going to live on what I make from my poetry. His wife believed him. Always. She always believed that he could do that. She always believed that that plan could work for him. Grandfather, not so much. His grandfather said, what are you going to do with yourself? And Rob said, I'm going to write poetry and live from my poems. And his grandfather, who was a good businessman, said, I have an idea. How about you try that for a year, see how well it works, see how much money you make, and then at the end of a year, we can reconsider this. How about you give it a year? And Rob, who was young and impatient and impetuous, said, give me 20. He meant years, right? And what's amazing is that Robert Frost did write books, get published, become famous as a poet, and it took 20 years. But that's really another story, and it's maybe another talk. I want to show you very quickly some of the pictures. Yes, please. This is San Francisco, just to give you an idea of the roughness of the place. This city of 200,000 people when Frost was born. You can see the masts in the background. There were lots of ships arriving. There was building going on everywhere. They were very proud. The Mint had opened in San Francisco recently, and some of these costumes are a little bit fantasy-like, but just wanted an image of the place from that time. Okay, could we have the next one, please, John? This is Frost's father. They called him Willie when he was growing up. This is from 1872 because that's the year he graduated from Harvard. And it's really interesting to read the reports from the secretary of that class. They have them every year, to read the reports that he sent them about what he was doing when he was in San Francisco gambling and having a good time. Okay, thank you. This is Mrs. Robert Frost. This is Robert Frost's mother, the Scottish woman. Anybody who met her talked about her eyes, and they talked about her hair. Apparently it was reddish brown, and she was very commanding and considered very beautiful. Okay. This is little Robbie. I think you can almost see the eyes. You know, even as an old man, Robert Frost's eyes were still so remarkable, so unusual. These blue eyes. His granddaughter has those eyes. People in that family have these bright blue eyes that look active, if that doesn't sound ridiculous. It looks like there's a lot going on. Yeah. Okay. And this is Rob with his little sister. He's holding his little hat in his hand. And this is his sister Jeannie, 2 years younger. Now, even to have a picture like this implies a kind of prosperity, a level of prosperity. This is at a studio, and this would have been sent to the grandparents back in Massachusetts who were already disapproving. Okay, please. This is a picture of the mighty Merrimack, Lawrence, Massachusetts, called the Queen City of the Merrimack. You can just see one mill, but that town had lots of mills. Some of you, I'm sure, know that later, in 1912, there was a very famous strike in that town, the Bread and Roses strike, right, because of all the mills. Frost worked in a mill more than once. One summer when he was at Lawrence High School, he worked as a bobbin boy, and then later when he was trying to figure out what to do with himself, he had a job changing the arc lights. There was a part of the lights way, way, way up in the ceilings of these huge spaces that burnt out very quickly. So you had to sit on the top step of a step ladder and reach up over your head and change these things. It was pretty dangerous, the kind of danger that a young man is happy to do. Okay, please. This is the class where the woman standing up at the back is Mrs. Frost, looking like she's been through a lot because she's been through a lot. The boy standing in front of her with the hat on is Rob. Her son was in her class. And if you look in the front row, the girl with the very long hair on the left is Jeannie. So her daughter, Frost's sister. And this was the class. This was at Salem Depot. Extreme right, they say, is Sabra Peabody in the back row. Can you see that? It's a female person in the back row with a... Thank you. This one is Sabra Peabody. And I mention her only because Robert Frost fell in love with her. She had a brother named Charlie Peabody who was a good friend, and this is what an 11-year-old Robert Frost wrote to the girl he loved. There are not many girls I like, but when I like them, I fall dead in love with them. And there are not many I like, but I like you because I can't help myself. And when I get mad at you, I feel mad at myself too. Okay. We won't talk about his spelling. This was the high school, which was a very grand place. They had graduation right across the street on the town green. Okay, and I think there's one more, maybe. This is the main street. That, what did I do with the pointer? Oh, thank you. This is a streetcar, and you can see the tracks. So if you went up this way far enough, you'd come to where the high school was. So Frost and his sister would get on this at the bottom of the street where they got off the train, and then get on the streetcar up to the school. Notice these impressive power lines. And you think, wait a minute, this is the 1800s? This is the late 1800s? Well, yes, because of all the mills in the town. Towns that had mills got higher tech than other places got. So especially, there was a lot of expansion in power after the big World's Fair of 1893, when Thomas Edison made the Great White City and a lot of people saw electric lights for the first time. There was a lot more interest in power and lines and such after that. Okay. So Robert Frost survived high school, and this is the woman he fell in love with, Eleanor Miriam White. He started asking her to marry him as soon as they graduated from high school, actually before that, if there's one more. I wanted you to see this to give you an idea of the scale of the mills. This is actually a double photo. You can see that. It's the same image twice. It's meant to be viewed in a stereopticon, if that means anything. Okay. These are belts, these giant, you can see these hanging, these big treated pieces of leather that let pulleys operate, that have to do ultimately with the operation of these looms. These are all bobbins of thread. When Frost was little, when he was younger, got a job as a bobbin boy. You'd have to drive around and collect empty bobbins and give fresh ones. So that's the scale of the mill. One more, please, John. And this is the girl he loved 3 years later. This is the year they did get married. They got married 3 years after they graduated from high school, because by then she had graduated from college. That only took her 3 years also. And she told him she wouldn't marry him until she graduated from college, and she really didn't want to marry him until he graduated too. But he hadn't graduated by then, and they decided to start a life together anyway. He did later go back to Harvard for a little while. But again, that's the other story for some other day. For today, thank you very much for being so patient and waiting until we got on our feet with the technology. Thank you. Thank you.